rejected and left to die alone, until the Vampire King claimed me under the blood moon. The trees, twisted and blackened with age, cast long shadows across the moss-covered ground, their gnarled branches reaching like fingers to block the weak light of the dying sun. Among the trees, a figure stumbled, her once fine gown torn and dirtied, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. Ilara had never imagined that betrayal could feel so cold, so final. One moment she had been a noblewoman of a respected house, a daughter of privilege and status. The next, she had been abandoned in the forest by those she trusted most, her own family, her own blood. They had left her to die, whispering curses behind her back, convinced that their treachery would secure their power. Pain throbbed in her limbs, but it was not only the physical agony that wounded her. It was the weight of rejection, the suffocating knowledge that the people who should have protected her had chosen their ambition over her life. Her chest tightened with grief, each breath a struggle against the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She sank to the forest floor, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the damp earth. Around her, the forest was alive, not with birdsong or the gentle rustling of leaves, but with a darker presence. Shadows seemed to move with intent, whispering secrets that only the most desperate could hear. Some might have called it magic, others might have called it madness, but Ilara had no mind left for reason. All she felt was the urge to survive, to cling to the faint pulse of life that still flickered within her. Her fingers scraped against a cold stone half buried in the earth, a fragment of some forgotten ruin. She closed her eyes, imagining herself back in the warmth of her family's estate, a place that now seemed like a dream she had lost forever. She had always thought herself safe within the walls of her home, shielded by the love of her family, the strength of her name. How cruel it was to learn that safety had been an illusion and love a lie. Suddenly, the wind shifted. The whispers of the forest grew louder, no longer distant murmurs but voices that seemed to circle around her. She shivered, fear clawing at her chest, and pressed herself closer to the ground, trying to become invisible. That was when she saw it, two eyes, gleaming like rubies in the gathering darkness. They were not human eyes. They were older, sharper, and filled with a power that both terrified and fascinated her. Ilara wanted to run, to flee from the presence that had appeared without a sound, but her legs refused to obey. There was something about the figure that drew her in, a pull she could not name. It was not warmth, and it was not mercy. It was something far older, something that belonged to the shadows themselves. "You should not be here," a deep voice said, smooth and commanding like silk wrapped around steel. The sound made her heart stutter, and yet, against all reason, she did not flee. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am Kale," the figure replied, stepping into the dim light. His presence filled the clearing, and the shadows seemed to bend around him. "And you are mine now." Ilara's breath caught. She wanted to shout, to fight, to demand that he leave her be. Yet even as fear gripped her, there was a strange, impossible fascination that made her stay rooted to the ground. Kale's eyes bore into hers, not with cruelty, but with a dark, inscrutable intensity that made her feel as if he could see every thought she had ever hidden. I am not yours," she stammered, trying to find the strength in her trembling limbs. "I belong to no one." Kale smiled, though it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator, the kind that had waited centuries for someone to challenge him, someone to intrigue him. "You do not belong to anyone," he said softly, "except the fate that brought you here. And fate has chosen you to walk with me." Ilara's mind raced. She did not understand what he meant. She did not understand why she was not afraid enough to run, why her legs refused to carry her away from the danger she should have sensed. She only knew one thing: she was alive, and Kale had chosen to keep her so, for reasons she could not begin to fathom. The forest seemed to shift around them, the shadows growing longer, darker, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Kale extended a hand toward her, a gesture that was at once both terrifying and inviting. "Rise," he said. "If you wish to survive, you must rise." Alara hesitated. She wanted to scream, to resist, but the thought of the cold earth beneath her back, of the forest creatures that lurked unseen, was enough to push her to her feet. Slowly, painfully, she rose, meeting Kale's gaze. Every instinct screamed that she should flee, that she should escape this powerful being and his unknown intentions. Yet another part of her, a part she had long buried beneath fear and despair, wanted to see what lay beyond this moment. Kale's eyes softened slightly, though the sharpness never left them. "You have strength," he said, "more than you know, but strength alone is not enough. You must learn to wield it or you will perish." "Learn from you?" Alara asked, incredulous. "Why would you care if I lived?" "Because the night is long," Kale replied, his gaze drifting to the blood-red moon rising above the trees. "And it chooses who it spares. Tonight it has chosen you." Alara's chest tightened. The moon hung heavy in the sky, its crimson glow casting eerie light across the forest floor. She had heard tales of the blood moon, legends whispered among frightened villagers and scholars alike, stories of curses and forgotten kings, of creatures who walked between the mortal and immortal worlds. And now here she was, standing beneath it, caught in the web of a fate she did not understand. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The forest seemed to watch, to judge, as if the ancient trees themselves were curious about the meeting of mortal and immortal. Then, without warning, Kale turned and began to walk, his movements smooth and predatory, as if the shadows themselves obeyed him. Alara hesitated, then took a step after him. Her mind screamed with fear and reason, but her heart was a different story. It beat with a strange, quickened rhythm, a mixture of dread and something else she could not name. Perhaps it was hope, or perhaps it was the dangerous allure of the unknown. As they moved deeper into the forest, the darkness thickened, yet it did not feel suffocating. Kale's presence was like a strange beacon, guiding her through the twisted paths and tangled roots. For the first time since she had been abandoned, Alara felt that she was not entirely alone. And yet, the knowledge that she now belonged, in some way, to this mysterious figure filled her with both fear and reluctant fascination. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the remnants of an old stone structure rose from the earth, walls covered in ivy, towers broken by time, and a great archway that seemed to hum with ancient power. Kale stopped and turned to her, his eyes reflecting the red light of the blood moon. "This place will be your refuge," he said, "for now, but know this, the night is patient. It tests those who enter its realm, and you will be tested." Alara swallowed hard, the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. She was a stranger in a world she did not understand, in the presence of a being she could neither fully trust nor fully resist. Yet, despite the fear, a spark of determination ignited within her. She had been abandoned, rejected, left to die alone. But now she had been chosen by something greater, something older than the kingdom she had once known. The wind stirred again, carrying with it the whispers of the forest. And in those whispers, Alara thought she heard a promise that her story, though dark and uncertain, was only beginning. As Kale turned back toward the shadows of the ruined castle, Alara followed, her steps faltering yet resolute. The blood moon hung high above, casting its red glow across the world, a silent witness to the beginning of a tale that would bind mortal and immortal together, in a dance of power, longing, and fate. And deep in the shadows, eyes unseen watched the pair, waiting, as if the forest itself knew that tonight, something extraordinary had begun. The ruins were silent, except for the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant cry of a lone owl. Alara followed Kale through the broken archways and moss-covered stones, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Every step she took seemed to echo in the empty space, reminding her of how alone she had been moments ago, and how drastically her world had changed. Kale's presence was overwhelming. His every movement held power and purpose, his gaze as sharp as a blade. He did not speak unless necessary, and when he did, his voice carried authority and mystery in equal measure. Alara could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, and yet she could not turn away. "This place," Kale said finally, pausing to glance at the crumbling walls around them, "was once a fortress of men who feared nothing. Time and magic have reduced it to shadows. But for you, it can be a sanctuary." Alara looked around. Broken stone towers reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers, ivy crawling over them as though trying to reclaim what time had taken. The moonlight, still blood-red and heavy in the sky, cast a ghostly glow on the ruins. She shivered, part from the cold and part from the strange thrill of standing somewhere so ancient, so full of secrets. "Sanctuary," she whispered. "I don't feel safe here." Her words faltered. Fear always had a voice in her mind, but something about Kale's silent presence made her hesitate to finish. "You will learn to survive," Kale said, his eyes darkening as he studied her. "But you must also learn restraint. There are dangers here beyond mortal comprehension. Some will test your courage, others your heart, and some will test both." Alara swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to challenge him, but the thought of doing so seemed foolish. She was human, fragile, and untrained in the ways of the supernatural. And yet a small spark of defiance flared in her chest. She would not be weak, not anymore. Kale led her through a shadowed corridor of the fortress, walls etched with faint, glowing runes that pulsed with soft light. "These markings are old magic," he said. "They bind this place, protecting it from those who wish to destroy. They also protect you, though only as long as you remain within these walls. Beyond them, there is only uncertainty." Alara's fingers brushed against the cool stone. She could feel the subtle hum of energy beneath her touch, a power that seemed alive. I don't understand any of this," she admitted. "I'm not like you." Kale's gaze softened just slightly. "No, you are not," he said. "And yet there is something in you that intrigues me. Mortals are fragile, yes, but you have endured. You survived where others would have fallen. That is rare." The words struck her in an unexpected way. For the first time since her betrayal, she felt seen, not as a weak, helpless victim, but as someone with worth. The warmth of that acknowledgement touched her heart, even as fear and uncertainty still clung to her like shadows. Kale guided her to a grand hall, the center of the fortress, where moonlight poured through shattered windows, illuminating dust motes that floated in the air. It was vast and empty, yet it held a strange beauty, as if the stones themselves remembered the glory of ages past. "You will stay here," Kale said, gesturing to the hall. "For tonight, at least. Tomorrow we will begin your lessons. You must learn to navigate this world if you are to survive it." Alara frowned. "Lessons?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "What kind of lessons?" "Lessons of strength," Kale replied, "of patience, of restraint, and perhaps in time lessons of trust." Trust. The word felt heavy on her tongue. Could she ever trust him, this being who had appeared out of the shadows and claimed her life as if it belonged to him? She wanted to say no, to push him away, to flee into the forest that had nearly been her grave. But she did not move. Instead, she sat on the cold stone floor, folding her arms around her knees. She watched Kale as he moved through the hall, silent, powerful, and completely unyielding. She hated that she felt drawn to him, that even in fear she could not deny the strange attraction that pulsed in the air between them. Hours passed. Alara slept little, her mind racing with questions, fears, and fragments of memories she wished she could forget. In the small moments when she dared to close her eyes, she dreamt of the betrayal that had left her alone, of the warmth of a family she could no longer trust, and of the blood-red moon that had marked her life forever. When she awoke, Kale was already there, waiting. He did not speak immediately, merely watched her with those piercing eyes that seemed to see past the surface of her thoughts. "You have been awake long enough," he said finally. "It is time to learn." He led her to the courtyard, where broken statues of forgotten kings and queens stood like silent sentinels. The ground was covered with frost, even though the sun had begun to rise in pale, muted light. Kale drew a deep breath, the cold air misting around him, and then he began. "Strength comes not only from the body," he said. "It comes from the mind, from understanding your limits and then surpassing them. You will not survive here by fleeing from fear. You will survive by mastering it." Alara listened intently, trying to absorb every word. His tone was stern, commanding, yet there was a method to his discipline that fascinated her. She realized that this was not merely training, this was a way to reshape her very spirit. The lessons were not easy. Kale pushed her to move faster, think sharper, and act with precision. Every time she faltered, he corrected her, sometimes with a harsh word, sometimes with a cold look that made her heart pound in equal measure with fear and exhilaration. Despite the difficulty, Alara felt herself changing. Her limbs grew stronger, her mind clearer, and her resolve firmer. She began to understand that survival was not about hiding or pleading. It was about embracing the unknown and finding courage within herself. And yet, even as she grew stronger, there was another force at work, an emotional pull she could neither resist nor fully understand. Kale's presence lingered in her thoughts, in the brush of his gaze, in the way his shadow seemed to move with hers. There was tension, unspoken and electric, between them, and she could feel it gnawing at the walls she had built around her heart. One evening, as the blood moon rose once again, Kale led her to the highest tower of the fortress. From there, the entire forest stretched out beneath them, a dark sea of trees bathed in crimson light. "Look," he said, gesturing to the world below. "All of this belongs to those who understand it, who dare to take it." Alara shivered, not from cold but from the weight of the words. She realized that the world she had once known, safe, small, predictable, was gone forever, and in its place was something vast, dangerous, and magnificent. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, unable to contain the question any longer. "Why did you save me? Why claim me?" Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Because fate brought you here," he said simply, "and because there is a fire in you that even I cannot ignore." The words made her heart skip, even as confusion and caution battled with the stirring warmth in her chest. She wanted to resist, wanted to deny the connection that seemed to thread between them like lightning in the night. And yet, she could not. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the whispering wind and the distant call of night creatures. Alara felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her, the understanding that her life had shifted irreversibly. She was no longer merely a survivor. She was a part of something older, something darker, something powerful. The moment was shattered by a sudden movement in the forest below. Shadows twisted unnaturally among the trees, and Kale's eyes narrowed. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "They come," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Enemies of the throne, mortal and immortal alike. You must be ready." Alara's pulse quickened. Danger, she realized, was never far from them. And yet she felt a strange steadiness, a newfound courage. She had been abandoned, rejected, left to die alone. Now she had a purpose. Now she had power. The blood moon cast its final light on the forest, crimson and unyielding. And in that glow, Alara understood something profound. Survival was no longer enough. She would not merely live, she would rise, and in the process, she would discover the depth of her own heart and the mysterious pull of the Dark King who had claimed her. And somewhere in the shadows, Kale's gaze lingered on her, unreadable, eternal, and filled with the promise of trials and truths yet to come. The forest below the fortress was quiet now, but the stillness carried a tension that made Alara's heart race. She had been awake for hours, staring out from the highest tower, watching the pale light of dawn filter through the trees. The blood moon had set, leaving the sky a wash of gray and muted gold, but its memory lingered in her mind like a distant song she could not forget. Kale had left her there alone for a time, saying only that she needed reflection and patience. Reflection. The word felt strange on her tongue. She had spent so many months running from betrayal, fear, and despair that the very idea of stillness was unsettling. And yet, as she gazed at the endless forest, she realized that the emptiness was not loneliness. It was a canvas, a space where she could begin to understand her own strength, and the presence of the Dark King who had claimed her life. Kale returned at mid-morning, his steps silent on the cold stone floor, his shadow stretching long behind him. There was something in the way he moved, in the measured precision of his gestures, that always left Alara breathless. It was not the terror he inspired, it was the quiet, inevitable power he exuded, a power that seemed to touch everything around him. "You watched the forest," he said simply, his voice low and commanding. Alara turned to face him, surprised by how calm her own voice had become. "I tried to understand it, to understand this place." Kale's gaze did not waver. Understanding comes through observation, yes, but also through action. You will learn more by facing challenges than by simply watching. Alara nodded. She did not question him, not because she was afraid, but because she felt the truth of his words. Survival, she realized, was not a passive act. It required courage, decision, and sometimes sacrifice. That afternoon, Kale took her to the lower halls of the fortress, where shadows pooled like liquid, and the air smelled faintly of ancient stone and cold fire. He stopped in front of a large archway, behind which a vast hall stretched into darkness. "This is the library," he said, "not just of books, but of knowledge older than your people can imagine. Here you will learn, not only to defend yourself, but to understand the world you now inhabit." Alara stepped forward, her fingers brushing the worn stone of the archway. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the scent of old parchment and candle wax. Shelves stretched high, filled with tomes, scrolls, and volumes bound in strange materials she had never seen. "You will study," Kale continued, "magic, history, the ways of the night. You must understand the forces at play, for knowledge is as powerful as strength, and sometimes more so." Alara nodded again. She had never been a scholar in the traditional sense, but her mind was sharp, eager to absorb whatever knowledge could help her survive. And beneath her determination, a quiet curiosity stirred, a fascination with the man who guided her through this new world, whose own power seemed limitless yet controlled. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a quill or the flutter of a page. Alara's hands ached from writing and copying, but her mind was alive in a way it had never been before. She learned of the curses that lingered in the forest, of vampires bound by ancient pacts, of mortal factions that sought dominion over creatures they barely understood. Each revelation made the world seem larger, darker, and more dangerous, but also more meaningful. And Kale was always there, observing her. Sometimes he corrected her readings, other times he challenged her understanding with questions that forced her to think beyond the obvious. At first she bristled at his presence, at the weight of his scrutiny. But gradually she realized that his guidance was not cruelty, it was a tool, a means to sharpen her mind and her spirit. Days became weeks. Alara grew stronger, more confident, yet the tension between her and Kale remained, simmering beneath every interaction. There were moments when his gaze lingered too long, when the softness in his expression threatened to undo the careful walls she had built around her heart. And there were moments when his eyes hardened, when the coldness of his command reminded her that she was still under his claim, still in a world that demanded obedience. One evening, as the sky darkened to deep indigo and the first stars began to appear, Kale approached her quietly while she practiced her swordwork in the courtyard. The metal of the blade gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and Alara moved with a precision she had never known before. "You hesitate," Kale said softly, his presence like a shadow falling over her shoulder. Alara froze mid-strike, gripping her sword tightly. I am careful," she replied, trying to steady her racing heart. Kale stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Careful is not enough. You must anticipate, move with certainty, act before fear has a chance to strike. That is the difference between survival and defeat." She lowered her blade, exhaling slowly. "I am trying," she said, a trace of frustration in her voice. I do not always understand what you expect." Kale's eyes softened, just enough for her to feel a flicker of something unfamiliar, almost like warmth. "Do not focus on pleasing me. Focus on understanding yourself. Everything else will follow." The words stayed with her long after he left. That night, as she lay on the cold stone floor of her chamber, she thought about what he had said, understanding herself. She realized she had spent her life trying to meet the expectations of others, her family, her house, the people around her. She had been so focused on what others demanded that she had forgotten to listen to her own heart. And now, in this dark fortress, in the presence of a man who was unlike anyone she had ever known, she had the chance to reclaim herself, to discover not only how to survive, but who she truly was. Yet the longing she felt for Kale was undeniable. There was an attraction, yes, but it was more than that. It was the pull of curiosity, the recognition of strength, the fascination with someone who had endured centuries and yet carried his own shadows within him. She wondered if he could feel it too, or if she was alone in this tangled web of emotions. Days passed with lessons, training, and study. Kale's world unfolded before her like a dark tapestry, filled with danger, mystery, and beauty. She began to understand that the Vampire King was not merely a figure of power. He was a being shaped by centuries of loss, betrayal, and duty. His strength was absolute, but it was tempered by a loneliness that he never fully revealed. And in that loneliness, she found a strange connection, a bridge between her fear and her growing admiration. One night, as the blood moon rose again, Kale led her to the balcony overlooking the forest. The moon's crimson light bathed the landscape in an otherworldly glow. Shadows twisted among the trees, moving like living creatures, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to come from beyond the world of mortals. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly, his voice blending with the night air. Alara shivered. "The power of the forest, or the moon?" Kale's eyes met hers, dark and intense. "Both and more. The night has a memory, a will of its own. It marks those it chooses. You were chosen." The word sent a shiver down her spine. Chosen. The word echoed in her mind, mingling with the memory of her abandonment, of her family's betrayal, and the terror she had felt alone in the forest. And yet, there was also a strange comfort. She had been chosen, yes, but not for suffering. She had been chosen to endure, to grow, to learn, and perhaps to transform. Kale remained silent for a long moment, watching her. Then he spoke, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "You are stronger than you realize, Alara, and yet there is still fear in you. Do not hide it. Face it, accept it. Only then will you understand your true power." Alara nodded, unsure if she was ready to fully face the darkness within her, but certain that she could not turn back. She had been abandoned, rejected, and left to die. But now, she had a chance to rise, to claim her life, and to confront the shadows that threatened her world. And as she stood there beneath the blood moon, Kale's presence close and commanding, she felt the first stirrings of something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Not fear, not despair, but hope. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it secrets of the night and promises of trials yet to come. And somewhere in the shadows of the forest, enemies waited, unseen but aware, their intentions dark and unrelenting. Alara drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of destiny pressing upon her. She was no longer merely a survivor. She was a participant in a world of shadows and power, and she would need every ounce of courage to navigate the challenges ahead. And Kale, the Dark King who had claimed her under the blood moon, the being of power and mystery, whose own heart was a labyrinth of loss and longing, he would be both her guide and her test. The night stretched on, crimson light fading into silver, and Alara knew that the path forward would be neither easy nor safe. But for the first time, she felt ready to walk it. And somewhere deep in the fortress, hidden from mortal eyes, forces stirred, watching, waiting, as the story of the mortal and the immortal unfolded beneath the eternal night. The fortress was silent, but not peaceful. A tension lingered in the air, sharp and electric, as though the walls themselves could sense the storm approaching. Alara stood at the highest tower, her fingers brushing against the cold stone, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The blood moon had returned, casting a crimson light across the world below, and with it came the knowledge that the night would demand everything of her. Kale stood behind her, silent, his presence immense yet calm. For centuries, he had walked the world alone, commanding shadows and darkness alike, but tonight, even he seemed aware of the gravity of what was to come. The forces that sought to destroy them were no longer distant whispers. They were real, moving in the forests, across the lands, and through the hearts of those who wished them harm. "You are ready," Kale said softly, his voice low and steady, though there was an edge of tension beneath it. "But do not mistake readiness for certainty. Tonight will test you as it will me." Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She had trained, learned, and grown, but the fear of failure still lurked at the edges of her mind. I will do what I must," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Kale's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "That is all I ask." The first signs of their adversaries appeared as shadows among the trees, moving with unnatural precision and intent. A rival vampire clan, bent on seizing Kale's power, had come with a mortal faction in tow. They did not merely want to challenge Kale, they wanted to destroy him and anyone who stood by him. Alara gripped the hilt of her sword, the steel cool against her palms. She could feel the magic in the fortress vibrating beneath her feet, a subtle hum that strengthened her resolve. She was no longer the frightened girl abandoned in the forest. She had survived, learned, and grown under Kale's guidance. She was ready to stand, not only for herself but for him, and for the life they were building together. Kale moved with a predator's grace, stepping forward to meet the first of the attackers. Shadows seemed to bend to his will, the darkness around him rising and swirling like a living cloak. Alara followed, her movements careful, precise, guided by the lessons he had taught her. Each strike, each step, each choice was deliberate. She was no longer merely reacting, she was controlling the outcome. The battle was fierce, a clash of shadow and steel, magic and mortal strength. Alara felt fear, yes, but she also felt determination burning like fire in her veins. She fought not out of obligation, but because she had chosen to stand, to claim her power, and to defend the one who had saved her when all others had turned away. Kale moved beside her, a shadow among shadows, striking with unmatched precision. Even in the heat of battle, there was an elegance to his movements, a mastery that reminded her why he was called the Vampire King. And yet, even he was not invulnerable. A sudden strike from an enemy caught him off guard, and he staggered, the crimson glow of the blood moon illuminating the pain that flickered across his face. "Alara," he called, his voice sharp, urgent. She rushed to his side, her sword slicing through the attackers, her mind clear and focused. She could feel the bond between them, invisible yet unbreakable, guiding her actions. Together they moved as one, a harmony of strength and determination that neither enemy nor shadow could easily break. But the enemy was relentless. More shadows emerged, creatures born of dark magic and malice, forcing Alara and Kale to fight not only for survival, but for the very future of the fortress and the life they had begun to build. Each clash tested their limits, Each moment demanded more courage, more strength, more trust in each other. At one point, Kale was struck again, and Alara caught him before he fell. He looked at her, eyes intense, and for the first time she saw not the invincible king of shadows, but a man who depended on her, who trusted her with his life. "You are stronger than you realize," he said, his voice a whisper against the roar of battle. "Do not fear what you are capable of." Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the recognition of her own power, the bond they shared, and the realization that she could rise beyond the limits she had once believed defined her. The tide of the battle began to shift. Alara, moving with a clarity and courage she had never known, struck decisively, guiding their enemies into traps, using the very environment of the fortress and the lessons Kale had taught her to turn the fight in their favor. She felt a strange exhilaration, a connection to the world around her and to Kale that was both thrilling and terrifying. Finally, as the blood moon reached its zenith, the last of their adversaries fell. The forest was silent once more, but not peaceful. The air was thick with the remnants of magic, shadow, and the echoes of the clash that had tested their limits. Kale stood beside her, his chest heaving, eyes locked on hers. For a long moment neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had faced the darkness together, and had emerged not only alive but stronger. Their bond deepened in ways that neither had fully anticipated. Alara lowered her sword, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Is it over?" she asked, voice soft, almost afraid to break the fragile peace. Kale nodded slowly. "For now, but know this: darkness never truly dies. It waits, and it watches. We have won tonight, but the world is vast and our trials are far from complete." Alara felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The battles of the past weeks, the lessons, the trials, all had led to this moment. She was no longer a victim of fate or betrayal. She had claimed her power, faced the shadows, and proven herself. Kale reached for her hand, his touch light yet filled with a weight that made her heart flutter. "You have grown, Alara, not just in strength but in courage, in wisdom, in heart. And for that you have my respect, my trust, and something more." Her breath caught. She had feared connection, had feared dependence, had feared allowing herself to care. And yet, in this moment, she realized that her heart had already chosen. She had been alone, abandoned, and left to die. But now she had a partner, an equal, and a bond that transcended fear and darkness. "Kale," she whispered, searching his eyes, trying to read the depth of his centuries-old soul. He smiled faintly, an expression that held centuries of pain, loss, and longing, softened by something new: hope. "Together," he said. "We rise together or we fall together. That is the choice of those who walk the night side by side." Alara nodded, feeling the weight and truth of his words. Together. She had once been alone. She had once been rejected, abandoned, and left to die. But she had chosen to rise, and in doing so, she had not only saved herself but had forged a bond that even time and darkness could not break. The fortress seemed to breathe around them, shadows curling and retreating, as if acknowledging the victory and the new chapter that had begun. And beyond the walls the world waited, vast, dangerous, full of magic, ambition, and challenge. But Alara no longer felt fear. She felt readiness. She felt strength. She felt belonging. Kale led her to the highest balcony, where the forest stretched endlessly below. The moon, now waning, cast a softer, silvery light over the trees. "The night will always test us," he said, "but we have proven that we can endure, and perhaps even change it." Alara gazed out over the forest, her heart filled with a mixture of awe and determination. She had survived abandonment, betrayal, and despair. She had faced the unknown and emerged stronger, wiser, and braver. And she had discovered that love, quiet, patient, and enduring, could exist even in a world of shadows and darkness. Kale's hand found hers again, warm and steady. "The world is not kind," he said, "but we are not powerless, and now neither of us walks alone." Alara squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words in her very bones. "Never again," she whispered. "Never alone." The wind carried their words across the fortress, over the trees, into the night. And somewhere beyond sight, beyond time, forces stirred, aware of the bond that had been forged beneath the blood moon. But whatever trials awaited, Alara knew this. She had claimed her place in the world, her heart, and her destiny. And she would face whatever came next with courage, strength, and Kale by her side. Together they watched as the first light of dawn touched the forest, silver mingling with the last traces of crimson. Shadows remained, yes, but they no longer held the power to terrify. They were a reminder of what had been faced, what had been conquered, and what lay ahead. And so, under the fading glow of the blood moon, a mortal and an immortal, a queen in training and the vampire king, stood side by side, ready to walk the path of night together, unbroken, unafraid, and bound by trust, courage, and the quiet, enduring promise of love.